Hey everyone, it's OSK. Today I wanted to give some advice and help some of you newer players get better at Spellbreak. As you saw in the title, I will be going over the top 5 most common mistakes I see players make in Spellbreak. A lot of it is suboptimal movement, but there are a few other broader things that I will go over as well. And I really hope this helps some of you who are trying to improve at the game, and maybe it'll shift some thoughts or misconceptions you had about how Spellbreak works. So without further ado, let's get into this. The first mistake I see players make is probably the most common one, and that is being predictable with your movement. I cannot tell you how many times I have fired an ice lance through a player because they move in a straight line at all times. If you're walking to the right for 3 entire seconds, I'm easily able to predict you're going to keep moving to the right, so I will line up a nasty snipe to chunk you for 70 health. You need to be unpredictable with your movement, or at least move enough to make your opponent miss. This applies to running, traveling with a rune, levitating, and even using class skills. This especially applies to flying. While flying is faster than running, if you fly in a straight line, it's going to be easy to pick you off, or at least easier than it would be if you were changing directions. Another example would be a player levitating and just letting themselves fall like normal without pressing back or moving to the left or right. It's very easy to predict how you're going to fall from the levitate animation if you don't change it up a bit. Standing still in general is also a big no-no. You really don't ever want to be standing still unless you're reading a scroll or rezzing a teammate, so be sure to cycle through your movement keys and make yourself a moving target. And that really is the key to all this. If you can vary up your movement while you're moving by throwing in an extra levitate, maybe a few sidesteps, or even a rune charge, it's going to be much harder to hit you than it would be otherwise, and you should be able to travel through the HoloLands a bit more safely. The second huge mistake I see new players make is being inefficient with your mana. As you may have learned, your mana is used for both your primary fire and levitation. The trick is to maintain your mana without burning through all of it at once. Ideally, you never want to use all of your mana unless you're closing out an exile. The biggest mistakes I see most new players make is using their full amount of mana to just levitate and then have to recharge with no ability to immediately begin attacking if they need to. Levitating itself isn't really too necessary in some fights, and sometimes levitating can even mean exposing yourself to a fireball or an ice lance. It's best to be smart about levitating in general, and when you do levitate, always be sure to leave even just a sliver of mana left for you to use, just in case of emergency. Your spells will fire no matter how much mana you have left, as long as you're not out of it. You can still shoot even a frost shot if you have at least 1 mana left, for example. Your mana bar can also recharge faster if you have some still in the tank, so keep all of this in mind. Another thing related to this is players just spamming spells when they don't need to. For example, if you're fighting a Tempest with a Stone Gauntlet, chances are you're not going to hit him unless he just steps on the ground for whatever reason. If you're spamming your Stone Shockwave on the ground while they're floating in the air, you're never going to hit the guy, so you're just burning through mana for no reason. All the Tempest would need to do is wait for you to run out of mana and use that opportunity to land some free damage. Bottom line, spamming your spells where they are probably never going to hit in a million years is very inefficient and will leave you open to counterattacks. Be sure to space out your shots if you need to, and learn when you can and when you cannot potentially land a hit. If you can master proper mana economy and use less mana where you don't have to, you'll find yourself in a lot more favorable situations most of the time. This is a subtle thing, but it goes a very long way. Mistake number 3 is something that can be fixed with just pure knowledge and experience, and that is being unaware of danger. What this means is either not paying attention to where other players might be or what loadout they have, or making a move that puts yourself at an unnecessary risk. For one example, you probably don't want to approach a toxic cloud because it could turn into an explosion of dragonfire and damage you for quite a bit. For another example, one of the biggest mistakes I see players make is roaming the open fields while in a fight with a Stone Shaper. Stone hits for high damage and has a completely grounded spell, which means that if you don't reposition soon during the fight, you're going to get bought pretty easily, but at the same time, it's very easy to avoid damage altogether. Same thing if you're at the bottom of a mountain against a frost or lightning player. If there's no cover around you, you're probably going to get bought for 70 damage for free. You always need to make sure that you're making the right decisions to avoid putting yourself in a disadvantageous position, whether that be finding a wall to take cover, taking the high ground to make it easier to fight your opponent, or even using a rune to escape or engage. Whichever decision you make, you always want to consider, what does my opponent have in their kit that can ruin my day? As long as you're aware of this and playing around it, you should have an easier time with your games in Spellbreak. The fourth mistake I see a lot of new players make is just picking bad fights, especially in the early game. The most common thing I see is new players trying to fight someone who has a belt off drop when they don't, and new players trying to fight early with a weak early game class like Tempest or Frostborn without getting other pieces of gear to compensate for it. If someone finds a belt off drop, especially if it's blue or purple, you do not want to be fighting them. At this point, you should not draw any attention to yourself, start looting your own chests, or simply just run, as the chances of you winning that fight are usually really small unless they are an actual bot. That's if your opponent finds a belt before you, but the same should be said if you run Tempest, Conduit, or Frostborn. The early game is not a fun time for you. Wind does very little damage compared to Toxicologist, Stone Shaper, and especially Pyromancer, so most fights as a Tempest should be avoided early on unless you can find some good gear first. Another example of taking a bad fight would be to try and snipe someone when you're 50 HP after a fight you just had. There is a possibility you could hit them for 70 damage or so, but they will most likely have armor left over, and now you're trying to heal while your opponent could be approaching you or even trying to snipe you themselves. 9 times out of 10, you're going to be out of luck. So it's just situations like that where you don't necessarily need to put yourself in danger that you can avoid and then come back for the exile once you're better prepared. The final mistake that new players make that I have on this list is flat out just running bad builds. I can tell you as a Spellbreak shoutcaster and above average player who is around this game a lot that I have seen it all, and it is wild the kind of builds I see people run. For one thing, Vital Stone is not good on any build, but I've seen people run Pyromancer with Wind, Frostborn with Lightning, and even Tempest with Stone. I'm sorry if you're in this example and you don't like it, but someone's got to tell you. What all these examples show is a lack of build goals. What is each component of these builds supposed to do? With Pyromancer and Wind, you already have a close to mid-range option with Fire, so maybe you should try covering long range with Frost or Lightning. With Frostborn and Lightning, you have 2 long-range gauntlets, so maybe you should swap Lightning with Stone, Toxic, or Fire. With Tempest and Stone, you're not getting any value from Tempest's Squall skill, so why are you running Stone? This also applies to talents in a similar way. Do you gain any value out of running Fortitude most of the time against a Tempest or Conduit? Probably not. Recklessness is in a bit of a weird spot because you only get value out of it once your armor is down, and you're also just not taking Recovery or Thirsty instead, which are much better. All this to say, think about what's generally good in the game right now, and think about what's going to give you the most value or what goal you're trying to achieve, and try to play around that. I think you'll have an easier time if you take this into account. But anyway guys, that's going to do it for the top 5 mistakes new players make in Spellbreak. Hope you all enjoyed the video. If you have any more tips, please feel free to leave them down in the comments below. What do you think players need to know to get better? Anyways, be sure to like and subscribe, do the YouTube thing, follow the socials down in the box below, and make sure to follow the Twitch channel where you can find me playing this lovely game and also casting it as well. But that's going to do it for me. Y'all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all out there.